Hey guys, what's up? We gotta talk intermittent fasting. I had so many questions yesterday. I sometimes know when certain posts are gonna be controversial, and I didn't think yesterday's post was gonna be controversial, but people are really, really emotional and attach their feelings regarding their morning eating routine. So, mind blown there. But before we get started, I just want to let you guys know that if you throw me a cite your sources or research ? I'm going to immediately block you. Because when you study physiology and you're looking at nutrition in the context of biology and physiology, you take science in context of the human body. And, it's like one of those things where, well, this nutrition study says to do X, Y, and Z. Okay, that nutrition study says to jump off a cliff. Have fun with that. You know what I mean? It's just this very science is God culture, and science is used right now to really manipulate the masses, obviously. So just kind of keep that in mind. Research studies have their place, as do nutritional epidemiological studies, but that doesn't mean that they're everything. And we always want to look at research in context of biology and physiology, because if, a study says intermittent fasting helps with inflammation, that's great, but what is it doing to your thyroid, your adrenals, your long-term health, your hair, what is it doing to all these other things that we care about? That's not what the study is researching. They're just checking to see if it helps with inflammation. So it's just really important to kind of keep that in mind. And I don't really like this, show me the research study. That's just a negative Nancy situation, and I just really don't appreciate it here on my page. If you want some resources for me to point you to so you can do your own research, I'm fine with that. I will help you out. With that being said, we're going to talk about fasting. So, fasting is very popular right now. It's touted to reduce inflammation, help with gut issues. All your friends are doing it. IF is the hot new thing, and it's a marketing ploy for sure. I mean, we used to call it starving yourself or skipping breakfast, and now it's called intermittent fasting. And, there's a lot of people in the keto community, people that struggle with autoimmunity, who tout fasting as this cure-all. But if you notice, they started one way, right? Usually paleo, and then they've had to get more and more restricted to the point where they're no longer eating carbs, and they're now skipping meals because their health is obviously not getting better. And oftentimes it's getting worse. And as a little tangent, I used to follow a lot of these paleo pages, low carb, keto pages, and I would always notice that these practitioners would always have to be healing themselves of new things. Now they have mold illness, and now they have this, and now they have this, and now they have this, and I'm their bodies are so not resilient to the stressors in their life. There's something wrong. And so I just want you to kind of keep that perspective as we go through this, because I know that it can help with symptoms, but does helping with symptoms really mean that it's doing good, or does it mean that it's symptom suppressing? There's a difference between suppressing a symptom and fixing the root cause of a symptom, which often many things in the health and wellness community are not doing that. We want to fix something and then make our bodies stronger and stronger and more resilient over time. That's kind of the goal. So, as someone who has struggled with autoimmunity in the past, I was diagnosed with celiac disease and Hashimoto's and lupus. I had all these types of autoimmune symptoms, and they couldn't really figure out what was wrong, but it all stems back to my digestive health. My gut was so effed up, so messed up. And it would come out in, achy joints, skin lesions, extreme exhaustion, hair loss, inflammatory dermatitis all over my skin, psoriasis on my scalp. I would just have all these autoimmunity type issues and inflammation issues. And so when I dove into keto and intermittent fasting, I totally saw benefit for sure, because finally my gut was given a break and I was not having to digest food all the time. And it felt really good at first. I felt my stomach was flat for the first time. I felt less puffy. I was able to lose a little bit of weight, a good 7 pounds of fat. I felt leaner, and I had a lot of mental clarity. I was really energized. I was working out every day. I was strength training. I was feeling wow, I'm so productive. This is amazing. I'm feeling great. But what I've come to learn with myself and working with so many clients is just because something feels good doesn't mean it is good. And oftentimes it comes with a payment. You're building up debt right now, and you're gonna have to pay it later for sure. You're gonna hit that wall, boom, come crashing down, and all your nightmares are gonna come to life. You're gonna realize that, oh my gosh, I'm worse off than I ever was before. The reason this is usually the case with intermittent fasting is because we don't run on thin air. Let's pretty much summarize what this whole story is gonna be about is women's bodies do not run on thin air. And so we have to run on fuel. Every single one of the cells in our body, including our liver cells, our gut cells, our skin cells, all run on a specific sugar called glucose. And if they do not have glucose being provided to them via the digestive tract through our food, our body actually has a backup system to make glucose. And the way that it does this is it breaks down our own tissues. Usually starts with muscle tissue because that's the easiest to break down. It's the easiest to turn into glucose with stored glycogen. And then it starts with our tissues, like our ligaments, that fat, that layer of fat in between our muscles and our skin, that gives us that like plump and youthful look. It breaks down certain tissues like our liver, our organs. The thymus gland specifically is something that goes pretty quickly. And it sends all these tissues to the liver in a process called gluconeogenesis and turns those tissues or those amino acids into sugar, blood sugar, so the cells can uptake that fuel and continue on during a famine. But as you can imagine, this is not an easy process. It's quite inflammatory and it's quite damaging. We don't want to be breaking down our tissues unless necessary. And our body is not going to be providing or doing all the tasks that it should be doing. It's going to be only doing the essentials like living and surviving. And this can lead to all types of issues. So keeping this in mind while we intermittent fast and understanding that cortisol and adrenaline are the primary stress hormones that need to be elevated in order to break tissues down. One of their main jobs is to break those tissues down for the liver to then turn them into sugar. Understanding that we have to keep stress hormones elevated every time we need fuel should really make us nervous because, yeah, we might lose a little bit of fat. Usually it's around 5 to 7 pounds, but we're also losing tons and tons of minerals. We're peeing them out, which is why we feel so lean, not as puffy, is because it's actually, adrenaline is a diuretic. And then, we also have to, maybe lose a little bit of fat at the expense of losing the youthfulness of our skin, the elastin, the collagen. Our ligaments take a hit, any type of sphincters, so like the esophageal sphincters. We have something called the ileocecal valve that is a one-way valve in between the small intestine and the large intestine. Like I said, our thymus gland and our liver really take a hit because they're the ones that can tend to be broken down into sugar quickly. And so these are all being paid at the expense of us not eating. Thinking that we're doing something because our ancestors did it is not a good enough reason to do something. And to think that our ancestors would have not eaten on purpose is just absolutely ludicrous. Also, mental clarity, tons of energy, a little bit of weight loss, better gut health. If we are only achieving these things through not eating, we need to acknowledge that we have a problem. If eating is expressing these issues like weight gain or gut issues, then we need to fix the internal imbalance and not just starve our body of the essential fuel it needs, because we don't live like our ancestors do. We live in a modern environment that is very, very stressful, places so many stress demands on our body, including toxins in our air, our food, our water. We're not living, a native life anymore. We're not walking around. We're not moving properly. We're sitting all day. We're very sedentary. We're being exposed to fluorescent lighting and LED lighting. We're being exposed to EMFs and all types of, dirty electricity. Even when we're walking on the earth anymore, it's not charged the same way as it used to be. And so it's very important to understand that we, our exposure to all these chemicals in our environment and all this chemical disruption is affecting us on a cellular level. And to actually force our body to handle the stress environment with no fuel and having to make its own fuel actually increases stress, doesn't decrease stress or help with longevity at all. But to answer your guys' questions on why do I feel so much better intermittent fasting, in my opinion, people experience positive results short term. I'm going to emphasize short term with the intermittent fasting for two main reasons. Number one is their guts are beyond messed up. And number two, they are confusing adrenaline with feeling better. They're confusing adrenaline with health improvements. So starting with point number one, our guts are messed up. not because we take rounds and rounds of antibiotics, which does mess up our guts, not because we eat tons and tons of pesticides, which does mess up our gut, not because our water's super messed up and our air's messed up, which does mess with our guts, but because we also live in a society and an environment that has increasingly made everything antibacterial. They've pasteurized everything. We've cooked everything. Our goal is to eliminate as much bacteria as possible and manipulate our food as much as possible to a very non-native form. We've gotten so used to eating so many non-foods that we don't even know that what we're eating is not what our body recognizes as food. And so because we're not being exposed to a variety of bacteria in both our food and our environment, eating a mixture of both raw and cooked foods, eating a mix, or making sure we're, walking barefoot out in the dirt, and making sure we're, playing in the soil, and we're getting even like high quality soil on our food into our diet. We're not washing our hands all the time and trying to sterilize everything. The age of sterilization, this really wreaks havoc on our biome. We have a microbiome, which is this wonderful ecosystem of bacteria and viruses and pathogens and all types of bugs that exist in us and on us, in our uterus, in our vagina. We're really these bacterial creatures that coexist with bacteria, and bacteria do us a lot of good, and we work together with them. And what has happened is we've become increasingly obsessed with eliminating them to our own demise, and obviously our guts are paying the price. Because what we have done is not eliminate all bacteria. No, we've only eliminated beneficial microbes that offer us something in return for benefiting from living in us or on us. And so this increasing need to cleanse and sterilize and do detoxes and things like that has really wreaked havoc and allowed opportunistic bacteria to grow. And you know what else allows opportunistic bacteria to grow? Is stress. Stress paves the way for digestive breakdown. And so, all these stressors that we're exposed to on a daily basis, including not eating enough, wreaks havoc on our hydrochloric acid, which is our stomach acid, which should be as acidic as battery acid at all times. Any pathogens that we get exposed to in our diet should die and feed the microbes that already exist in our colon. But no, our stomach acid is diluted from our stress, from mineral deficiencies, from all types of poor food choices and more, and now it's like the acidity of apple cider vinegar. It once should have been able to burn right through your hand, and now it's not enough to really bother anyone. And so pathogens are making it through, and then we're also not digesting a lot of the protein in our diet or the foods or the minerals or the nutrients in our diet properly, and so our body is hurting for amino acids, our body is hurting for these nutrients that aren't getting broken down. And so this undigested food is making its way from the small intestine to the large intestine, from the stomach to the small intestine, and then we have impaired bile flow. So if you're not healthy, if you don't have the right minerals, if you're not hydrated properly, your bile that your liver makes and then puts into the gallbladder, and then the gallbladder will secrete that bile when in the presence of that digested food dropping into the duodenum, and that bile is now becoming sludgy and sluggish from all these toxic chemicals and estrogen dominance and thyroid issues. And because bile flow relies so heavily on thyroid function, so many people now have impaired bile flow. And so that bile is really responsible for keeping the small intestine sterile, for helping us break down fats, and for excreting old hormones. And if we are not fueling our metabolism, including intermittent fasting, that bile is now no longer secreting properly. And then we should mention the pancreas, which also makes us digestive enzymes, specifically lipase and some other ones like the enzymes that help us break down fructose and other sugars like glucose. And so as our body succumbs to the stress of life, and as we don't fuel our body properly, we do start to pave the way for small intestinal bacteria overgrowth, or intestinal overgrowth where it doesn't belong in the small intestine. The purpose of the small intestine is to uptake nutrients and further break down our nutrients with enzymes. That's why it has the microvilli and the villi. They're little finger-like projections that help pick up individual molecules and nutrients and then allow them to get into the bloodstream. And what begins to happen is, as this digestive breakdown starts to take place, low HCl, poor bioflow, poor digestive enzyme function, and then, the addition of fortified wheat products that have iron in them, which causes tiny little scarring on our small intestinal walls. It's a recipe for disaster. And then we're not fueling our metabolism properly, so our transit time is slowing down. A body that's functioning very slow is going to have food move through the digestive tract very slow, creating the perfect storm for bacteria to start making its way into the small intestine. And then because food's moving very slowly and we're eating excessive amounts of fermentable fibers like beans and grains and nuts and seeds and soy and raw greens, huge green salads, and all these cruciferous vegetables, and it's just a 98.6 degree hot body that's moving really slowly, and just this perfect environment for fermentation to start to occur. And this bacteria just starts to go wild. And even if it's beneficial bacteria, meaning it belonged in the colon, it doesn't belong into the small intestine. And as this bacteria increases, it starts creating something called lipopolysaccharides, or LPS, which is responsible for all types of autoimmune issues, all types of inflammatory conditions. This is also considered as endotoxin or endotoxemia. And these endotoxins are bacterial toxins that get into the bloodstream and burden the liver and cause all types of metabolic issues. They stress the cells the hell out. They deplete the cells of minerals. They can cause systemic inflammation, and it can feel really good when you stop feeding these bacteria. But like I said, they don't belong there in the first place. And so fasting or starving these bacteria really does nothing for the long term. It only reduces endotoxin for the short term, which feels really good, right? You're going to see maybe a reduction in your inflammation in some cases. For people who have like rheumatoid arthritis or other autoimmune conditions, they can see some benefits because this endotoxemia has been causing a lot of problems for them in the first place. And so instead of starving that bacteria and starving yourself in the process, because to starve bacteria, you usually have to starve yourself in the process, it's better to just deal with these endotoxin issues head on, which might not give you such a quick fix like fasting does, but it will give you better long-term results. So some things that lower endotoxin day after day would be like wild oregano by North American Urban Spice Co. I really like wild oregano. Spore-based probiotics like Just Thrive or Megaspore Biotic. Eating a raw carrot salad every single day, which is why I highly recommend it to all my clients, all my students. A raw carrot salad is a must if you're trying to reduce these issues. It helps bind to estrogen as well, which is going to increase endotoxin, because remember, estrogen is a bacteria of growth, and so it does encourage the growth of pathogens as well, and bacteria. Bamboo shoots also really help with this. Well-cooked mushrooms help with this. And then gelatin products like gelatin, collagen, really well prepared bone broth. All of these these glycine-rich foods are going to help with that scarring. It's also going to help rebuild that mucosal layer and help build up our stomach acid, because really, restoring digestive function is the ultimate goal, making sure we're making enough stomach acid again, digestive enzymes, and our bioflow is really, really good to dump that junk out of our liver consistently. And then overall, making sure that we have designated meal and snack times. The average American is eating 12 times a day. They're just snacking all day long, and it's better to just eat and then be done for a couple of hours, and then eat and then be done for a couple of hours. Give your body some time to digest rather than eating sporadically. Have designated meal and snack time. Eating 3 meals a day and 3 snacks a day is so much better than just causing your body to have to digest all day long. And then consider, raw fats are incredibly high in butyric acid, which can help really change that gut microbiome. So things like raw butter, raw coconut cream, the fats in raw milk, the fats in raw cream, those are incredibly healing to our digestive tracts. Even the fats in a raw avocado that's very, very ripe can be really helpful. So any type of raw fats, specifically animal fats, like bone marrow even, and tallow and stuff like that, just incredibly good for our mucosal barrier and really lowering inflammation in our digestive tract. All that to say is fasting is kind of a quick fix solution for an underlying issue that has probably taken years to develop, and starving yourself is probably going to cause more problems, which leads us into point 2, which is adrenaline feels really good, but that doesn't mean it is good. And forcing your body to tap into its fat cells under duress, remember our fat cells store things like toxins and hormones and heavy metals and things like that, is going to really lead to rapid aging. Keep in mind that two of the main things that are stored in our fat cells are going to be estrogen and iron, like iron that we grew up eating, which is like non-bioavailable, really bad iron. And so the mixture of polyunsaturated fats and iron causes something called lipofuscin. And lipofuscin is pretty much like, I guess physically it looks like age spots and hyperpigmentation and stuff like that, liver spots. But internally it's a very inflammatory thing that's going on. And so when we're opening up those fat cells before the body is ready to deal with what's in those fat cells, we want our body opening up fat cells slowly, releasing what's in storage very slowly so our body can actually deal with it. We're probably causing more problems than good, lots of inflammation. A lot of people that fast long term and do keto long term will actually develop autoimmune conditions or thyroid issues because iron and estrogen are very anti-thyroid. The lipofuscin, polyunsaturated fats and iron mixed together is very inflammatory and can actually has been shown to be tied to autoimmune conditions. And so this is very common and something I see. You lose all this weight, you've lost that beautiful youthful layer in between your muscles and your skin, and then you go back to eating carbohydrates, or you've hit a wall and you just gain it all back, if not more, and now you have another issue going on. And so it's just very important to understand that just because something feels good or just because something makes you lose weight doesn't mean it's automatically good. And then remember, a lot of people will tout fasting as detoxifying. It's not detoxifying. Your liver is something that is detoxifying all the time, and it needs to continuously be full of 150 grams of stored glycogen or stored glucose. And the minute the liver runs out of glucose is the minute that you stop detoxifying, and you also stop converting inactive thyroid hormone T4 into T3. This is why people who fast, and do keto, they have cold hands and cold feet, their body temperatures are low, their pulses are low, they are not metabolically stable individuals. And they also just, I tend to see that they're just negative, snappy people, like they're just very defensive. And then they also, interestingly enough, especially women that I notice, and this is just an observation I made, it's not an accusation, but I really noticed that a lot of women who do keto and fasting, they really have lost that layer of fat in between their skin. And so their faces kind of look sallow. They don't look like plump and healthy and youthful. Just because they're skinny and have abs doesn't mean anything in regards to their health. Having your ribs showing as a woman is not necessarily a positive thing. I would really like to know how their periods are and how their ovulations are and where their progesterone levels are at. Also, we just got to keep in mind that once the liver runs out of sugar, the first tissue that's going to be broken down is muscle. Muscle tissue is going to be the thing that is lost first, which is why we rapidly lose weight, because we're not actually losing fat. We're turning muscle usually into fat. And this is why oftentimes over time fasting makes us skinnier, but it's more of like a skinny fat because we're losing muscle. We also can lose our thymus gland, so our thymus gland gets broken down pretty quickly, and our thymus gland is a regulator of our immune system. So I find that when people are post-keto or intermittent fasting after, usually like a year-ish, they have really bad food sensitivities. They react to all types of foods. They can't tolerate any foods. And like we talked about, they also can't digest many foods because they've really lost that ability to make all these digestive enzymes that once helped them break down each individual food. We have enzymes for everything because we're meant to eat everything. And so, now they have to actually heal the digestive process and get their immunity back. And the last thing is, this idea that there's supposedly a keto flu or an intermittent fasting flu. The reason that you feel so sick is because in the first week, you literally, adrenaline made you piss out all your minerals. And so now, you're really depleted in these essential electrolytes like calcium, specifically magnesium, and then sodium and potassium, which are all so important for metabolic function and thyroid function. And so if you, peed out all your minerals and you lose all your minerals, the longer you intermittent fast, the longer that you cause yourself to be depleted over time, the longer it's going to take for you to recover. This is a question I get all the time. How long is it going to take me to recover from keto? How long is it going to take me to recover from intermittent fasting? I've seen it have to take sometimes 1.5 years, 2 years, because you have to restore gut function, you've got to restore mineral levels, you've got to get your body out of that fight or flight state, which is usually very used to just switching into breaking down our own tissues for sugar at that point. It's very used to being that fight or flight state. Oftentimes we're estrogen dominant because you need carbohydrates in order to detoxify estrogen properly, break it down, go through both both phase 1 and phase 2 in the liver. And so we have to make sure we're ovulating. Some women have lost their cycle, and so at that point, now we no longer have progesterone in the picture. Usually we have to heal our thyroid function because our thyroid takes a hit when our liver doesn't have any sugar in it. We can't convert T4 into T3, and so a lot of times we technically turn hypothyroid when our liver doesn't have enough carbohydrate. And so, there's so many factors to consider as we've cut carbs or just intermittent fast. I know I brought keto into it a little bit, but it tends to go hand in hand. And so intermittent fasting does starve our liver of sugar depending on how long we do it. A healthy liver usually can hold on to sugar for about 8 to 10 hours, but usually people are fasting for longer than that. And at that point, our body's going to have to start making its own sugar using stress hormones. So I hope this was helpful. There's no judgment. I just want you guys to understand the science behind intermittent fasting. I see so much BS advice regarding intermittent fasting. I don't think intermittent fasting should be recommended for women ever. I think it's a horrible idea, especially for women, but it's a bad idea for men for the most part too. So overall, it's just one of those things where, to be able to use science to see through the baloney can be really empowering. And if you truly want to heal, you kind of have to eat your way out of it. As much as eating can sometimes be uncomfortable, especially if we have digestive issues, what has gotten us there in the first place is often under eating or not eating enough. And so like I always say to my clients, the only way out is through, and sometimes we just gotta push through. And by providing our body with the fuel it needs day after day, it's gonna translate to the body that it's safe, it's cared for, it's fed, it doesn't have to go into its backup system, it's not in a famine anymore, and it can start to use its energy to rest, rejuvenate, and restore itself.